Hi, and welcome to another episode of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us again on the podcast, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And it'll be no surprise to regular listeners and viewers that we have another great guest this week.
We do indeed. This week we're chatting with David Goodman, friend of the podcast. You might remember him from our Christmas episode where we chatted about our books of the year. But now he's here to chat about his own work. He's written a whole bunch of really interesting short stories, a lot of sci-fi work, and his debut novel, A Reluctant Spy, is out now.
Yeah, and you say, you know, we chatted with him. In fact, you weren't here, Tarek.
I wasn't here. Marco gave me a different day, so I turned up and the studio was empty.
But it was a really great chat with Dave. Really interesting to hear about his journey, which was a very long one. And I think his story is a great one for showing the resilience you need to be in this industry, but also that if you stick with it, the sort of success that you can have. Because as well as the debut, as he tells us, there's a TV deal in the offing. So it's a really interesting episode. So we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat. But for now, let's get straight into the podcast.
On with the podcasts.
So thanks for joining me, not Tarek, but just me today. But I'm going to start with the question, because I know you're a regular listener of the podcast.
Sure am, yeah.
So you're ready for this, I hope. Did you always want to be a writer?
I think as long as I knew that was a thing you could do, I definitely. I started out, I think writing stories was a thing that I started doing at school, in primary school, and probably more so in high school. And then I had some over-enthusiastic English teachers, I think, who probably gave me more praise than I deserved at the age of 11 or 12. And in doing so kind of ruined me for writing for the next 15 or 20 years, but also gave me that initial impetus to keep writing and to write a bit more. So I spent a lot of time writing at university, and then through various back and forward different career choices and thinking about what I actually wanted to do with my life, the one sort of single thread that was consistent was writing. And it was consistent in that it was always there in some way, but it definitely wasn't consistent in terms of how much effort or focus I was putting into it.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But I think I'm right in saying, we've spoken about this before off podcast, but I think I'm right in saying that you, during that university period, or maybe it was just after, you did complete a book and then tried to get somewhere with it. Is that right?
Yeah, it was just after. It was 2005. I did NaNoWriMo and finished a dreadful science fiction book called Freenet, which I hope never sees the light of day. Really bad, honestly. It's about 80,000 words, and I queried that. I queried it. I sent it out to 3 or 4 agents. Didn't really know what I was doing, and this was kind of 2005, 2006. I think it was a bit easier to get stuff out if you knew what you were doing, because there was just less competition. Because people were still taking things by mail. There was still a lot of quite manual stuff, but I did some dreadful stuff and got roundly rejected, and basically then didn't try again for several years.
Well, I was going to ask about that because, when people put themselves out there with their writing, whether it's at that very early stage like you did or later on, there is always that issue of how you deal with people saying no to you and the rejection side of things. And did that set you back, do you think, before you started then taking writing more seriously in earnest? Yeah,
I think it did. Setting me back is an interesting way of thinking about it, because I just don't think I was ready at that point. There's a sort of alternate universe version of me, I think, who really did some studying and figured things out, although there were a lot fewer resources available and a lot fewer guides and things. There was the Writers and Artists yearbook, and that was about it. And the version of me that got it together and figured that out earlier, I think might have had a slightly easier time breaking in or finding an agent, but also I don't think I was writing at a good enough level. So the plus side of not succeeding earlier on is that I then went away and just wrote a lot of novels. And I was also simultaneously writing and sending out short stories, and I did that about 4 or 5 times before the appeal of getting my own rejection slips mailed back to me with my own postage, because you had to pay for your own postage back then, kind of wore off, and I was like, I'm not sure I'm ready to do this, but I kept writing and I kept writing, and it was very much sort of peaks and troughs. Like I would write for 2 or 3 months very intensively, and then I would sort of fall off the wagon, if you like, and not really do it for a while, and then come back to it again. And I did that pretty much from, I think, 2006, 2007, right up to 2019, when I started to take it more seriously.
Yeah, so what was there a specific reason that you decided in 2019 that I'm going to actually try and do this more seriously now?
I think I had been in a series of quite demanding day jobs, and I'd also done a kind of bunch of writing related stuff, because I was kind of looking for the shortcut, if you like. I started a writing group because I couldn't find a writing group. That went really well, and then I couldn't really sustain it because I was doing sort of 50, 60-hour weeks in my day job, and I started to look around for like ways to kind of short circuit the process of just learning how to consistently write. And I couldn't find a shortcut because, spoilers, there are no shortcuts. Yeah. You do unfortunately just have to learn how to do it and how to kind of stick to it. And I think the big thing for me was finding something that was sustainable, that I could manage alongside my work. And 2017, 2018, I came out of agency work and started working client side, so that my hours went down a bit, and started to enjoy my day job work a bit more, but also have a bit more kind of bandwidth for other things. Yeah. And that coincided with me starting to just write much more regularly. And then in sort of late 2019, I sat down and I said, I'm going to try and write every day for a month, just to see how if I can do that, if I can establish a habit. I did that for a month, and did it for another month. Then I was like, this is kind of working for me, but it's every day is too much. I can't do that. And because working at the weekends, working in the evenings felt like homework. And the one thing that's been true throughout my life is I've always hated doing homework, especially kind of self-imposed homework. So I was like, what can I do consistently? And I started getting up very early in the morning and writing before work, and that suddenly kind of unlocked everything, because I felt like I could consistently do it. And once I'd got in the habit of it, it wasn't that hard. It was just kind of showing up. I was also kind of half asleep, and when you're half asleep, you're much less likely, I think, to question the value of what you're doing. You just sort of sit down and do it.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because certainly I've found as well that getting into writing more seriously, it is about, I suppose it's like many things, but it's like developing a habit is quite an important part of it. Certainly in my experience, it sounds like in your experience as well, that it almost becomes something you do, not in that homeworky way, but it doesn't seem like such a big deal as when previously, well, I think I might try and write today, and if you sat down and nothing happened, it was a big disaster kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the thing I realized around then, 2019, 2020, there was two kind of linked things that I realized. The first one was that if beating myself up was going to work as a motivational method, it probably would have worked already. And there was, and that I didn't come up with that phrase, but when I think I read that online somewhere, and I went, oh yeah, that's quite a good point. Like, that as a form of motivation, like just shouting at yourself doesn't really help. But the big thing that kind of changed my mind was the idea that it's not really about how many days in a row you're writing or how many words you're writing. It's more about stacking up any days and any amount of writing, if it's a couple hundred words or 1,000 words or 5,000 words, and stacking those days up, regardless of whether there's a 2 or 3 day gap in there somewhere, and getting practiced at getting back on the horse when you fall off is the main thing. And that was what made a huge difference. And I think I also had, and especially in 2020, there was a lot going on in 2020, as we all remember. And I think I was looking at my job I was doing at the time, because I was a contractor, and I lost my contract and then had to scramble to find a new job. And I was sitting there looking at my finances, looking at my kind of time spent working, and I was like, am I going to actually commit to this? Like, is it worth the effort that I'm putting in, or should I go and do freelance work on the side? Or, you know, is this worth the effort? And I think from a purely financial point of view, if I'd looked at it back then and been honest with myself, it's like there are absolutely no guarantees in publishing about money or anything like that. But I was kind of thinking, would I, even if I knew for sure that I was never going to get published or there was never going to be any financial reward for it, would I want to do it anyway? And the answer was yes. Like, I'm going to do this writing, even if it's destined to just remain a hobby. So I may as well properly commit, figure out how to do it in a sustainable way that doesn't make me feel sad.
Yeah.
And that was the kind of turning point, I think.
And yeah, I want to stay on your process, and particularly focus briefly on this getting up early and writing because what time do you get up to write generally?
On a weekday, on a normal day, about 5:30. Yeah.
So we're talking proper early then. In that case.
It's horrible. Like I don't make any bones about that. Like I think if I am ever lucky enough to do this full time, the absolute first thing I will do is get up about 2 hours later. But 5:30 is the only sort of time that I can reliably do two things, which is to do about an hour to an hour and a half of writing. And I'll also get out for a walk in the morning. And I work from home and I don't commute, which is also a big factor. But I think those two things together are kind of the sort of dual pillars that everything else is built on. And getting up that early means I can kind of usefully get a good hour of writing most days, sometimes an hour and a half. And getting out of the house every morning is just the best possible start to the day. On days when it's raining or I miss it for another reason, I can tell because I always feel a bit kind of irritable. And I think that combination of writing and walking is definitely the engine of everything else.
But do you find that having that, I suppose this goes back to the habit point as well, that you know, like at 5:30 I'm getting up, I'm doing an hour and a half of writing. That helps you get into the headspace easier when you sit down at the desk. Whereas I think other people can, even me sometimes when I go to, if I don't have that set time, I'll go and sit down in the evening and I'll find myself sort of, going about the edges of writing, if you like.
Yeah.
I'll maybe look at a bit of research here, procrastinating a bit before you actually start writing. But because you've got that set time, that helps you just lock into the actual writing.
And I'm a fallible human like everyone else. Like I some mornings I'm distractible and I don't get into it, but I walk downstairs. I try not to look at my phone or do any email or do any internet stuff before I've done the words. But I'll go downstairs, make a cup of tea, come back up, sit down, and genuinely, even though I'm showered and dressed and fully started the day, I'm still kind of half asleep and not fully like in that active thinking about work or thinking about bills or whatever. So I'm in that sort of slightly. And especially in the winter, it's pitch black outside and I live in a village in the middle of the countryside and it's totally silent at that time in the morning. The only creatures making demands of me in any capacity are my cats. And they're part of why I have to get up anyway because they're now trained. So if I ignore my alarm, they'll like whack me in the face, which is pretty effective.
And when you're doing this hour writing, do you have is it a time thing for you rather than, some people have word counts every day they want to hit. It's more the time spent writing that's important.
It's absolutely time based. Like I used to be a hardcore word count guy. I used to have spreadsheets. I still have spreadsheets. I still track how much I write, but it's very much I sit down, I try to do 90 minutes. Sometimes it's an hour and 15, sometimes it's an hour and 20. Very occasionally it's sort of 45 minutes, but it's about stacking up that time. And some days it's like 300 words and it's a real struggle. That's usually when I'm dealing with like I've stopped cold at the end of a scene and I just don't have a good idea of what the next scene is going to be. But sometimes I'll get 2,000 words in an hour and a half. And those are rough words I'll need to rewrite the following day, but they are, I think the time I spend just seems to, and focusing on the time rather than word count, I think really helps me to consistently get the word counts I need to for the schedules I'm writing to.
And going back to this period where you decided 2019, 2020, I'm going to take this more seriously. You started this sort of regular habit of writing, but also I think I'm right in saying that the other thing was that you joined a critique group around that time. Is that right?
Yes, it is. So I'm in Edinburgh. I'm part of a couple of groups. I'm in Edinburgh SFF with yourself as well, which is a Discord server and a kind of in-person meetup group. And I started a group called Edinburgh Genre Writers, which is still running. I'm not a part of it anymore, which was very much focused on critique. But ESFF is much more of a kind of pub meetup group and chat server, and it's great. It's kind of fundamental part of my writing community in Edinburgh. So I did a few sort of critique swaps in that group, and then I met Nicholas Binge, who wrote Ascension,
previous guest of the
podcast, yes, through ESFF, and we were chatting, and he was talking about this really intensive critique group that he was a member of. And he told me about it, and he told me about the sort of fearsome quantity of words that they were reading every week. And I was like, oh, that sounds intense, but it also sounds like exactly what I want. So I kind of essentially bullied my way in.
Let's tell, I mean, people that saw the Nick Binge episode will have an idea, but let's just remind people what we mean by intense, because it really is intense.
It is super over the top, to be honest. And so essentially there are 5 or 6 of us in the group who are active writers. There's about 7 or 8 in the group total. And people come in and out based on whether they're drafting a novel or not. Some of us are published, some of us are not, some of us are agented, some of us are not. But we're also all gradually moving through the publishing process, and I think over time I'm pretty certain everyone in that group is going to get published at some point, just because of the dynamic of the group. So in any given week, 3 or 4 of us are probably going to submit something, and that can be anywhere between 2,000 or 3,000 words if it's a short story, right up to, I think Nick submitted 12,000 words the other week there. And it's a lot, but we submit it through the week, and then we all read it. Everyone reads everyone else. Sometimes you can't make it, and you apologize, or you might be able to do the reading but not attend the meeting. But the kind of efficiency of the meeting and the way that we run it is that all the commenting and the critiquing happens before the meeting itself. So we're not doing a sort of round table, here's what I think about your story discussion. Instead, everyone reads comments. The person who is being critiqued reads all those comments and then comes to the meeting with their questions. And that's very, very efficient, because we can review, I don't know, 20, 30,000 words of fiction between 3 or 4 people. We can review that in an hour and a half, and we do that every week. So it's mega intense. People drop out and come back in if they're going on holiday, and we have various mechanisms. We use like rolling synopsis documents and just getting caught up in the Discord server that we use to run things. So there's loads of ways to effectively limit the impact, but there is a degree to which you're always reading.
I mean, that is a big commitment in terms of the reading side of things, apart from anything else, every week. But how valuable is that whole process to your own writing?
It's hugely valuable, and I think before I joined the group, I was kind of worried that, because it works really well for Nick, and he's quite open about that. He's very much a hot off the press writer. He'll write a chapter, drop it straight into the group. And before I joined, I was definitely concerned that I was going to sort of end up playing to the peanut gallery and struggle to sort of disentangle the emotions of the other group members from my own writing. So I tend to write 2 or 3 chapters ahead, so that I'm not thinking about everyone disliking chapter 9 when I'm trying to write chapter 10. I'm already on chapter 12 or chapter 13. But it makes such a difference just having a range of different viewpoints and opinions, and we're about 50-50 gender-wise. We've got a range of different backgrounds. People can bring loads of different technical experiences and life experiences. So it's just good to sense check what you're doing, what you're writing, and to get that broadness of opinion about the motivations of character, or whether you've pulled off the particular effect that you're going for in a chapter. And all of the people in that group are incredibly talented writers in their own right. And honestly, it's probably been the most life-changing part of my writing community by a long chalk, definitely.
And does that sort of group, do you think, help writers generally, help you, help Nick, help everyone else in the group, sort of bolster you for outside critique, I guess? You know, is it a sort of safe space of accepting and learning to deal with criticism, but also knocking back a bit and having a chat about these things in a way that you maybe can't once the book's out there and things like that?
100%. I think that if I had gone cold into the publishing process and the first time I'd received substantial critiques was from my agent or my editor, I think I would have been crushed, honestly. And I think, you know, I've been lucky enough with the book that most of the early reviews have been really positive, but I think it does prepare you for just a range of people having opinions about your work, and it prepares you for that collaborative relationship that you can have with an agent and with a publisher as well. So yeah, undoubtedly, yeah.
And at that time, was it longer fiction you were writing or short stories?
A bit of both. So I was writing novels from 2008 pretty much straight through to 2019 when I started to edit the book that got me my agent. But I was also occasionally doing a little short, and I've got a bunch of shorts that are kind of seeds, I think, for future novels. But I had this sort of strange thing where I wanted to practice different lengths and different forms, and I wanted to also kind of see if the short fiction market had changed. So I started querying a novel and submitting short stories within 2 or 3 months of each other. And I had a week in 2021 where I got an agent and had my first pro short story within a week of each other, which was kind of cool, kind of weird, but it was a good week. And I had a lot more success initially with the short stories than I did with the novels, because the first 2 novels that we went out on submission with died on submission. It didn't find a home. So I was doing really well with the science fiction short stories and still trying to sell novels, still trying to write novels. But I use short fiction kind of as a reset between book length projects. So if I finish an edit or I finish a draft, I'll sit down and do a short story, or sometimes 2 or 3 short stories as kind of a palate cleanser, if you like, and a reset.
And your short fiction is, certainly the short fiction that I've seen, is very different from your debut novel in terms of genre.
Yes.
So does that as well help you reset your mind in a way that if you're writing a completely different genre in that, as well as length?
Yeah, I think it does. Like, I have an ambition to write genre novel length fiction as well, and the first book we went out on submission with was a kind of near future, I mean, it's a spy thriller, but it's a near future spy thriller set kind of climate collapse environment, and I think that I just wanted to keep the short fiction going, essentially to keep my hand in the SF scene. Once I started working on spy thrillers with my agent, I was like, I want to do both. I want to keep the science fiction side going, and I've been really, really lucky with the science fiction stories. They've sold pretty well. I've had 4 in Clarkesworld and 2 in Analog so far. And the Nova Scotia anthology, which came out in July. So it's been great, and I think probably the uniting factor in all of them is that they are in quite grim worlds mostly, but are at their end generally quite optimistic, and I think that's a reflection of probably what I see around me, to be honest.
And before we talk about A Reluctant Spy, which we can see here, which is your debut novel, out in 2 days, which is very exciting at the time of recording. But just before we move on from the process completely, I did want to ask a question which I often ask, which is, are you someone that discovery writes, or do you outline your stories?
I have swung to both ends of that spectrum. I've done complete discovery write, mostly short stories. That's where I learned I wasn't great at discovery writing. And I've done very, very, very detailed outlining. And the novel that I'm currently editing with my agent, the first draft of that was outlined to the sort of sub-scene level, like bullet points inside bullet points. And that it showed because it was 186,000 words in its first draft. So I'm editing that down, and I think where I am now is that I will write kind of a bullet point list of the main beats of the plot that I want to hit. And then quite often now, because I'm pitching things on proposal to my editor, I'll be writing almost like a screenplay treatment, like a 3 or 4 page synopsis of how the book's going to come together. But I don't stick to that kind of very, very closely. Things will change. Characters will arrive. There's a character in the book called Sally Lime who didn't exist at all in the outline, and the whole London plot line of the book was also a lot shorter and smaller, and just much reduced in scope relative to what I actually wrote.
And well, let's talk about it. A reluctant spy, which we can see a twisting edge of your seat tale of mercenaries, greed, corruption, and espionage, I.S. Berry, and hits the ground running and never lets up. It's at the very top tier of espionage fiction from M.W. Craven. So, I mean, it's already got a big buzz about it, this book. Do you want to summarise it for us?
Yes, I can do. So, in my idea file about 7 or 8 years ago, I put a one-liner. And I think I was after watching a documentary about kind of digital footprints and how difficult it was for spies to kind of, or how difficult it was to, first of all, evade detection, and also how spies might have trouble in the future with kind of convincing backstories. And I wrote a line in my idea file that just said, "Real people lend identities to spies," and that felt to me like a very sort of
great
rich
idea.
Like a rich, great, because there's so many ways that could go wrong, and quite a few people have asked me in interviews and just people that I was speaking to for other projects are saying, "So is this a real thing? Have you done some research?" And I'm like, "No, if you think about it for more than 5 seconds, it's a terrible idea. Like, there's so many potential ways it could go wrong." But it's about a program called the Legends program, and there's a young man called Jamie Tulloch, and at the start of the book, he is 23. He's at Cambridge, and he's come from kind of quite a rough background in West Edinburgh, and he's kind of got where he got on his own. Doesn't really have any family support, doesn't really have any friends. He's a bit of a loner, and he is approached by SIS, by MI6, who say, "We will give you the support and the safety net that you don't have. You know, your comfortable middle class classmates, they all have networks of support. They all have people they can rely on. You don't. We'll give that to you, and in return, at some point in the future, we're going to come along and we're going to say, step out of your life now, and then we're going to use your identity for something. We won't tell you what, but we're going to use it." And he says, "Okay." And he decides, and it's kind of a devil's bargain. It's a bit, you know, he's giving up quite a lot. He's giving up restrictions on who he can make friends with, how many photos of himself he can have online, that sort of thing. So he's creating this sort of pre-made identity by just living his life. And he does that for 10 years. And then by the time the novel itself, kind of the main action of the novel starts, he's been living this life for about 10 years. And he's feeling like he's not sure if he made the right choice. And then he gets contacted and they say, "Okay, we're activating you. Meet your handler in Charles de Gaulle Airport in France." And he says, "Okay." And then off he goes. And when he gets there, he discovers, is this a spoiler? It's quite early in the book.
I think it's early. I think this is the
setup.
setup.
It's the setup for the book. So he finds his handler dead in the disabled loos in Charles de Gaulle Airport. And he's then stuck in an airport with a dead body, doesn't really know what to do. So he decides he's going to just proceed to the destination because the guy that's supposed to turn up and take his place hasn't shown up. So off he goes, and he ends up on the mission playing himself, and that's how the rest of the book.
I mean, I have to say, it is a brilliant concept, so I can see why the buzz is built around this. And, you know, again, this book, the way it came about, really is another demonstration of your resilience, I think, in writing. You've already said that your first 2 books that went on submission, you know, died on submission, as they say, didn't get picked up. So how was it that The Reluctant Spy came about?
Yeah, it's quite unusual. In some ways, like, my sort of route to get here has been quite conventional. I cold queried. I queried about 60 odd agents, and that's how I found Harry, my agent. But this was unusual in that we had these two books. The first one was called The Burning Line, and it was a near future thriller, and that's the one that Harry signed me for. He still loves that book, and he's hoping we can do something with it at some point. But it didn't go anywhere because, I don't know, it was probably the wrong time. And then the second book was a straight spy thriller, and it was, I think, on reflection, it just wasn't. Again, it wasn't the right story. But what happened was that both books ended up on the desk of Toby Jones at Headline, and he sort of emailed Harry and said, "This guy can obviously write quite fast because you've sent me two books in the space of a year and a half. Has he got any other books, any other finished books, or any other ideas?" And we said, "Well, here's some ideas." I sent him some pitches and some synopses, and he said, "Oh, what about that one?" When he saw the pitch for what was then called Legends, which is the name of the program in the book. And I wrote a proposal and I wrote a sample, and then they bought the book based on that. So
yeah. So that part of the journey, I would say, is quite unusual, I suppose, for a debut. So. Yeah. But as I said, so it started out as this, a pitch essentially picked up, but it's fair to say that the build-up has grown in the lead up to launch in a couple of days. You had excerpts, I think the publishers printed excerpts to give out at crime festivals, and your book is the first in the Goldsboro Crime Collective.
That's right, yeah.
So, which is a subscription package.
It is.
Is that right?
So Goldsboro Books are based down in London and Brighton, and they are a kind of specialist bookseller who do signed first editions, but they also commission special editions, and they have a couple of different subscription boxes. So they have their Premier one, and they have their Goldsboro Science Fiction box as well, where people sign up and they get sent a book every month. And they decided to launch a crime and thriller box called Goldsboro Crime Collective, and that launches this month, and my book was selected as the very first one in that box, which was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, given the journey you've been on, you must be on like cloud nine at this point in terms of all the things that have happened in the lead up to launch.
It's been pretty amazing. I think when we first started talking to Headline, we were kind of looking at this as, we sold it on proposal, and we were thinking, it's going to be a debut, it's going to be a hardback, and debut hardbacks quite often have quite a tough time standing out in the marketplace. But I've been pushing quite hard and contacting authors and got some amazing blurbs from that effort. And I think just lots of little things have accumulated, and the snowball is well and truly rolling now. Yeah,
but I was going to say, because again, it demonstrates the effort and the seriousness with which you've taken your writing career, I think, in the sense of what Headline have done this, they've printed those excerpts and stuff, but you've built a lot of the buzz yourself for this book. You've taken the steps to contact authors, as you've said, but also if you go to Dave's Instagram or Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, you'll see that there's a series of book trailers that you've made as well, which are great, and they really fit the vibe of the book and everything as well. I mean, did that just start out as a bit of fun, really?
Absolutely. There was a few friends of mine who were using tools like Canva to make sort of little clips and things like that. And I saw a few book trailers online and thought I could probably give one of those a go. And I used to do sort of audiovisual production stuff when I was in my teens, and I kind of missed it. And tools like Canva are amazing because you can produce something that looks pretty good quite quickly, and you also don't need to get into the really detailed timeline editing and things. So I just started doing that essentially just as to have something to post, and I started enjoying it so much, and I liked pushing how good I could make it with each one, and I think I've definitely seen a few people who've been like, I pre-ordered because of this trailer that I saw. So it's probably minuscule when you count it against any sort of real marketing budget, but it's been a good distraction, and and it gives me things I can post about it, and gives me things I can send to people.
And was the publisher happy for you to do that? Did you have to get their permission or anything like that?
No, I subscribe to asking forgiveness rather than permission. I just put them together. I always tag them, but I think it's I think there's a lot of there's a tendency to, among authors as well, to see you as having no real agency in your own, while at the same time being expected to market your books and expected to talk about your books. And I think sometimes you should just go for it and just see what happens. And that's what happened with the blurbs. Like, I put together a list, sent some emails, DM'd some people, and got this just really great response.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it was from just being quite open and forthright and saying, it's my first book. I'm sure you get dozens of these, but I think me approaching them personally rather than it coming from a publicist or just from a random email address, I think that probably really helped.
And you've done things as well, like go around to Edinburgh bookshops and give out the extracts and things like that to build up a bit of buzz for it as well. So, I mean, I think, we often have guests on the podcast and we talk about, marketing and pushing your book and stuff, but it just, I think those that follow your journey can see the sort of things that you can do that can make a difference, I think, if you're willing to do it. I mean, before we move on from that, though, I did want to speak briefly about, your whole career, I mentioned this earlier, it demonstrates resilience as well as determination, I think. And I think a thing that a lot of authors, especially at the start of their careers, have to deal with is setbacks. You've had 2 books down submission and stuff. How do you personally cope with those types of setbacks?
I think I start with a bunch of advantages first. I have a very happy marriage. I have a very stable home life. I have a really good job. I don't have kids, which means I have a lot more time to do a lot of this stuff. So I start from a higher baseline, I think, in terms of my capacity to do things. But if it comes back to like how you keep going, like I've definitely thought a few times, I'm coming into this with all of these really quite big advantages, and I still find it really difficult sometimes, like dealing with rejections, especially in the submission process. Just, because the one thing nobody prepares you for when you're going into the submission process is that you don't just get 1-line replies, you get 4 or 5 paragraphs of extremely nice, praise for your work, praise for you as a writer, and then, but sorry, we can't buy your book. Yeah. And, you don't get that in querying, you just get no thanks.
Or ghosted.
Or nothing. Exactly. So that I found that oddly harder because I was like, but it sounds like you like it, so why aren't we buying it? And there's several times I was sitting there thinking, if I am feeling these feelings and feeling as impacted as I am by these things, while being a lot more able to deal with it, I have no idea how some writers who are dealing with tougher circumstances do it, because it is incredibly hard. But the thing I've always come back to is, does publishing in and of itself matter to me more than the writing itself? And I think that as long as the answer remains no, it's the writing that I'm here for, it's the intrinsic reward of doing the writing, as long as that remains my main focus, then I think the publishing stuff is a lot easier to bear.
It can, speaking from my own side of things, it can definitely, you can lose focus on that sometimes, and sometimes it does just take sitting down and actually writing again to remember the joy that it brings you. But I did link to that. You also have a blog, and we'll put a link to that in the podcast description. But I want to highlight one post which I think spoke to me, but I think it spoke to a lot of people. Was the post about building a body of work, so that even if you're putting work out there that isn't getting picked up, that is getting rejected, you're always adding to that body of work, which is quite an important thing as a writer. And for your own sanity and for your own, I guess, checking yourself, you can look back and say, look, well, wait, I can still do it. I've done all this stuff in the background.
Yeah, I was really surprised by the reaction to that post, because I write a lot of blog posts. I write pretty much a daily blog post, not every day, because, I'm not a machine. But I wrote that one and put it out and didn't expect a reaction, and I'm still getting comments about it sort of several months later. And I think the thing that was one of those things that I thought about in 2019, 2020. I was like, what am I even doing here? Like, producing a bunch of work. And there's a common sort of metaphor that people use about lottery tickets and how everything you write is a potential lottery ticket, and you might surf that high of the industry. And I think the highs are very, very high when things are going well and things are
Yeah.
snowballing and the hype machine is doing what it does. It's extremely exciting, but the lows are brutal. And I think the sort of lottery ticket mentality can kind of make that feel worse sometimes. But what I was talking about in that post is that it's a weird kind of lottery ticket because it's actually a kind of cumulative. And if you are building up that backlog of material and things that you've produced and written and maybe got published and maybe haven't, all of those things are just sitting there so that if you do get a lottery ticket or you do get something that you can quote unquote cash in, something that you can then kind of trade for some success, all that work is sitting there waiting to go. And the only way to know that that work is going to be there is to produce it, is to focus on the work itself and detach the work from the success of the work and the commercial value of the work.
Yeah.
And I think when you start thinking of it that way, you start thinking about producing that body of work instead of whether your next book is going to succeed or not. I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, no, as I say, it really did light up some things in my own head. So, and I know it did for other people as well. So, yeah, we'll put a link to the blog in the podcast description. But let's get back to A Reluctant Spy. The launch is on Thursday.
It is, yeah.
This is a day I imagine you've been dreaming about since those first days that you wanted to be a writer. There's a launch at Blackwell's in Edinburgh. There's the aforementioned Nick Binge is going to be acting as compere. You must be really excited about that.
I am, yeah. I think I've been to book events before, but until I started making other writer friends, I hadn't really been to any launches per se. As you know, I went to a couple of Ian Banks things when he was still alive. I went to stuff at the Edinburgh Book Festival, but those were sort of seasoned writers. And I remember last year going to Nick's launch for his book Ascension, and that was his kind of Big Five debut, and just thinking, wouldn't it be amazing to be doing something like this, and exact same place where it's the same event, and so I've been thinking about it a lot, and obviously once I had a confirmed publishing date, I've been thinking about it a lot, but I don't know, I don't really know what to expect because I certainly didn't expect to sell it out, and I think that is kind of testament to the strength of the community that I've got myself involved in and the people that I've met, including yourself, and the other Edinburgh SFF folks, and just their willingness to support one of their own, which is great. Yeah,
like definitely. I think the community thing. We were talking about critique groups before, but even the Edinburgh SFF group that we're part of, it's definitely a very supportive community, and it helped. I think it's definitely helped my writing and my focus on my writing being a part of a community like that. So, for those that are out there trying to battle away and get that first thing published or whatever, then I would definitely recommend try to find a community of people that are doing the same thing. There's people at different stages of their careers in that community, but they're all as supportive to new published, doesn't matter what stage of your career you're at. So it is really worth doing if you can find it. But Reluctant Spy launch on Thursday, and some big news. The podcast will come out after Thursday, so the book will have launched by the time people watch this. But they will also have heard some other news as well about Reluctant Spy, which
they will, break. Which I've been sitting on since May or June of this year, which is A Reluctant Spy has been optioned for TV by Carnival Films, who are probably best known for The Last Kingdom on Netflix and Downton Abbey as well. And that was after London Book Fair. So my book, we signed a contract for that, and the book got taken to London Book Fair by my agent and by Emily Hayward-Whitlock at the Artists Partnership, who is a film and TV, book to TV agent. And I had this sort of weird couple of days where I was looking at my website traffic, and it went from sort of 15, 20 people a day to 200 or 300. And I was like, what is happening? And I texted my agent and said, "What is there something going on at London Book Fair?" And he said, "Yes. Speak to you later," basically. And then I got a call from him, and he said, "We've been speaking to loads of people about your book. There's a kind of big hunger for spy stories. There's the success of the Slow Horses TV series seems to have kicked off this little mini boom in spy fiction, and a lot of people have requested your book, and I was like, very exciting. So the book went out. It went out to Book Scouts, who are people in the industry who read books on behalf of other people. So they'll read it for production companies, they'll read for foreign publishers. And Scouts are a really fascinating part of the ecosystem because their entire job is just to find cool stuff and like tell, and they're not paid on commission, unlike a lot of other people in the trade. So they are usually paid a retainer, and because of that, they don't have any particular investment in any particular client relationship or anything like that. So they're quite impartial in a way, which is really exciting. I learned all this at Harrogate Crime Festival a couple of months ago because I got speaking to a book scout who had read my book and was telling me about the experience of reading it overnight so that she could then recommend it to her client. Amazing. It was cool. So there was an 8-way back and forth between 8 different production companies. I had the most surreal sort of 6 weeks of my life, having different calls with all those different companies, and we eventually settled on Carnival, who prepared this like amazing pitch deck that described all the thoughts they'd had and had kind of comp images from other TV shows and other actors and things like that, and it was just it blew me away. It was fantastic.
Amazing. So yeah, it really is living the dream at the moment in terms of being a writer.
100%.
So Reluctant Spy coming out on Thursday, and then hopefully the TV show will get made as well. But what comes next? What have you been working on? What are you working on?
So I've got one book deal with Headline, so with an option clause, so they get to take a look at whatever I write next in that genre. So I am at the moment writing another sample, similar to what we did for the first book. I've written a proposal and a synopsis, and I'm in the middle of writing this sort of 10 to 15k sample, and then hopefully they will decide they want to get another bite of the apple, because that is another Legends story. So it's the continuation of the story that started in A Reluctant Spy.
Excellent. And you also said that you're still wanting to do SF as well.
Yes.
So are you working on something there as well?
I am. So the book, my agent doesn't like the title that I picked, unfortunately. So we don't have a title for it, but I've been calling it Project Shard on my blog, and that's a kind of generation ship science fiction novel. So I'm now trying to come up with a new title for it before we go out on submission, but I'm in the middle of an edit for that. So I'm going to finish the sample for the Reluctant Spy sequel, and then start writing or start editing. I think I've got about 4 or 5 weeks worth of editing work to do, a fairly chunky edit. I'm pretty happy with it as it currently is, but I think my agent's right. It needs some more explosions, essentially. So I'm working on that, and that's hopefully going to go out on submission later this year.
Do you enjoy the editing process, or do you prefer the first drafting of it?
So the answer to that depends on the day of the week and the mood I'm in, and how long I've been editing things for. But I will say the big change that I think the thing that took me from I described myself in an early blog post as kind of like a draft producing shark. Like I was always just moving forwards. I was never kind of looking back and trying to edit things, just throwing these sort of completed books over my shoulder. And I think the editing, learning to edit, like sitting down and going, right, I'm going to teach myself how to edit, and doing a lot of editing in order to do that. I read a couple of books. I read Self-Editing for Fiction Writers, which is a fantastic book. Can't remember. I think it's Dave King and Rennie Brown are the authors. Great book. So I read that and edited the book that became The Burning Line. And now I think editing is probably one of my favorite parts of the process. But it depends, again, how rough the draft is, because like a fundamental structural re-edit is a bit like trying to unpick embroidery that's been made with rebar. It's like just really, really difficult.
It is. I find it very difficult once something is set down to completely pull it apart, which is sometimes necessary for the story, but it's a tricky process, definitely.
I love a line edit. I love the stage where you're going through with a few notes from your editor or your agent, and you're just tightening it up and making it really kind of sing. I love that because you can kind of see the book
Yeah.
getting better in real time. But yeah, I'm also now this drafting that I'm doing for the Reluctant Spy sequel is the first new stuff I've written in about 9 months, and I'm very glad to be writing something new because I've been editing for months and months and months.
Yeah. Well, those were the main questions that I had for you today. But as a regular listener of the podcast, you
Very
will know
regular, yeah.
that they're not the only questions. And we always like to ask our guests the same questions at the end of the podcast. The first of which is, what was the last book that you read?
The last book that I read, or that I finished, I'll give you two answers. So the Moscow X by David McCloskey was the last book I finished, which I loved. So he wrote, he's an ex-CIA analyst and wrote a book called Damascus Station a couple of years ago, which is a very tradecraft heavy, at the sharp end spy novel, and a really, really good one. And it has a character in it called Artemis Proctor, who's the CIA chief of station. And
Great.
It's a fantastic name, yeah. And she's probably the best thing about the first book, I think. And the second book is much more focused on her. But it's also a completely different novel structurally. It's very slow moving at the start. Not in a bad way, but it takes a while to get moving because it's introducing quite a large cast of characters, and then it just goes wildly off the rails in a very entertaining way in the second half. And the other book I'm reading right now is Ninth Life, which is the third book in the Factus trilogy by Stark Holborn, which I've kind of described in the past as like Firefly meets Mad Max. It's kind of set on this very strange desert moon planet, and it's just such a rich world building environment with so many little details that just the first book in that series, called Ten Low, got me out of a huge reading slump in sort of 2019, and the third book is even better, so highly recommended.
Excellent. And what about the last film?
Last film I saw in the cinema was Alien Romulus.
All right, okay.
Which I think I've seen some people say it's basically a Gen Z remix of
I've heard
of
that,
better films, which I don't agree with.
Right.
I think I really enjoyed it. It's gorgeous to look at. It's well worth seeing on the big screen. I think it possibly starts killing characters too quickly, because I think one of the things about Aliens
Tension,
is that
build-up.
you spend some time getting to know the cast before they start getting murdered.
Yes.
But it works really well, and it's also the facehuggers time to shine. They get a lot more screen time than I think they did in any of the other films. But it's a very competent, and it's very competently made with a good script, which I think in this economy is underrated.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And TV, what have you been watching on TV?
I'm obviously watching the new season of Slow Horses, which is fantastic. And because I picked up the first book in the Sly House series ages ago, and I'm just reading them like one book ahead of the TV show, which is kind of a good impetus to keep me going through the series, because the books are fantastic. So I just finished Spook Street, was the other book I finished just before Moscow X, which is the one that season 4 is based on, and it's fascinating to see the differences and the changes they made to the plot and who does what and things. But I also finished Griselda on Netflix, which is about Griselda Blanco, who's a famous
With Gloria from Modern Family.
Yeah, who is terrifying, just this absolutely terrifying, borderline psychopathic drug lord. But that's another show with a fantastic script, and I think the longer that I do writing stuff and writing related stuff, the more I appreciate a really well written script, because there's a lot of TV and a lot of films.
I was going to say, like, almost the opposite is true as well, isn't it? Is that maybe TV shows that I would have tolerated before, I kind of can't be bothered with. I find myself looking at my phone when you're just like, the plot doesn't make sense here, or this character wouldn't do that, or so maybe more definitely more a critical eye. When you're watching these.
It's when you hear lines that you've heard a million times, like somebody phoning another character and saying, "You've got to see this," that kind of, just these shorthand cliches for language, I think are you become more sensitive to them, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And Slow Horses, I absolutely love, but I always, me and my wife like to store them up, wait until it's finished, and then binge it very quickly. But
That's the way to do it. Yeah.
Last thing, as you know, is an either or, to which Tarek would say there's no right answer apart from one. So first up, science fiction or thrillers?
Oh man, I think science fiction is always going to be my first love. That's what I read when I was a kid. But I've also been into thrillers just as long. And obviously my debut novel is a thriller, so 50-50?
No. You have to pick one.
It's probably SF, if
Okay.
I'm honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about The Spies of Le Carre or McCarran?
Oh, good Lord. I think that, because I did my dissertation on John le Carre, and I love John le Carre's books, but I think his books are very much of a time. Obviously, he's passed away now, so he's not writing any new books. And the thing I admire most about McCarran's writing is how he is constantly evolving the characters and constantly evolving the situations they're in. So I think right now I probably am a bigger McCarran fan than I am a le Carre fan, but I love them both.
Yeah. TV or cinema?
Ooh, I love the cinema, like especially these days, because I think the cinemas have realised that the way to get people back into the cinemas is things like reasonable ticket prices and very comfortable seats.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
So going to, I went to cinema in the 90s and 2000s when the seats were narrow and uncomfortable and the audio sometimes wasn't great, and there was usually someone throwing popcorn in the back of your head, and it just wasn't a great experience. But these days the cinema is great. It's
partly because there's no one there as well.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that also helps. So yeah, I'll always I've toyed with the idea of getting one of those unlimited cinema passes because I think I would get a lot of value out of that. I used to have one when I was a student and basically spent whole days of my life in the cinema, and I'd love to do that again.
I won't ask you now, or early burn, because we know the answer to that, but music or no music when you're writing?
Music, definitely. I listen to a lot of it varies depending on what I'm writing. If I'm writing sort of fast-moving action scenes, I listen to a lot of mid-tier budget film soundtracks, especially sort of spy movies that have a lot of instrumental stuff. I'll listen to a lot of instrumental SF music. I'll listen to a bunch of kind of lo-fi hip-hop channels and just loads and loads of ambient stuff as well. But when I'm editing, weirdly, I listen to a lot of less structured music or different, not quite as driving beats. So I listen to a bunch of jazz and stuff like that.
Nice. And then last, audiobook. No, I'm not putting audiobook in the mix. The real question, real book or ebook?
So I was a massive ebook booster for a long time. I still,
Tarek would be happy.
yeah, I still have. I think e-ink technology is kind of one of the great unsung revolutions in tech, and I love e-readers and use mine constantly. But I mostly use my e-reader for beta reading and for industry stuff now. So I've sort of started to associate it with work. In a good way, it's the work I enjoy doing, and I love doing it. And I read a lot of short fiction on my. I use a Kobo actually rather than a Kindle. But these days, I think it's my failing eyesight or just preferring to sit back with a real book, and it's not about the whole smelling the book or anything like that. I quite like the immediate visual and tactile feedback of a book.
Okay, but the answer is real book.
It
Let's
is
be
real
clear.
book. Yeah, it is real book.
Okay, good, excellent. Well, thanks very much, Dave. That was great.
Thank you, Marco.
Well, thanks very much to Dave for coming on. I really enjoyed chatting with him, and I hope you enjoyed the chat.
I had a really great time, yeah, thanks.
But no, I thought it was really interesting. I mentioned this at the start, but obviously the resilience that he's shown, especially, I think, authors can often think, oh, I've got an agent, now I'll go and have the success. But to have 2 novels die on sub and to still have that persistence, and then to have what is looking to be a very big debut launch with A Reluctant Spy, it shows that, persistence really pays off for these sorts of things.
Yeah, and I think and I know we say this all the time, but it does show that idea that there is no such thing as an overnight success. And anyone, because on the surface, you look at Dave and you think, God, this guy's got a book out, he's got a TV deal, it's all happening, it's massive. But then you look behind the scenes and it's taken him years to get to this point,
Yeah.
and a lot of failure to get to this success. And it does show you, I think, that, you know, to get to that point, you need to keep putting yourself out there over and over again. Don't be scared of failure. And if you try hard at it, it will happen.
Yeah, and also, as he says, that ultimately the main thing is you do it for the love of the writing at the end of the day.
You
And
have to.
that
That's
is
right.
why you do it. And, you know, hopefully success follows on
Yeah.
from that. But, we'll put links so you can pick up A Reluctant Spy in the podcast description. And also I'll link to Dave's blog, as I mentioned. But next week we have another massive guest.
We are chatting with the wonderful Kate Moss, not the supermodel, the other one. The one with the CBE, probably the more famous one, I think. She's a historical writer, written a bunch of plays, essays, memoirs. Really fantastic, huge list of books that she's written.
Yeah, a fantastic guest to have on. So please do join us for that episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do take time to rate and review us on your favourite podcast app, or leave a comment down below if you're on YouTube telling us how much you enjoyed it, please. If you didn't enjoy it, you don't need to leave a comment, believe it or not. But yeah, if you can do that, that helps us to continue to get these great guests onto the podcast.
Yeah. And as always, if you want to get in touch, you can do so by sending us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page One. And in fact, UK Page One, just search for that across any of our social media platforms. It's all the same. Our email address is is it hello? No.
It's podcast.
It's podcast at writegear.co.uk. It should be hello. It's podcast at writegear.co.uk. And let us know what you thought, any question you might have for guests, etc. We're always happy to read it.
Yeah, and of course now, Tarek, as well.
Our brand new Patreon.
Yes, Patreon. However you want to pronounce it.
I don't.
But yeah, if you do enjoy the podcast and want to support us on the podcast, then it would mean a lot. You can go to our Patreon, and there are different tiers of support that you can give, and you get benefits for those. We'll put a link to that in the podcast description. Absolutely no pressure, but it would help us to continue to grow this podcast. Yeah. But otherwise, have a great week, and we'll speak to you next episode.
See you later.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page One, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.